Good morning, studio folks. I'm hoping that this video finds you maintaining with grace in this complicated time that we find ourselves in. I'm making a quick video to talk about mind mapping. We're going to be doing it, and we're going to use it a lot, actually, because it's a super valuable tool in building context around the things that we are interested in. I want you to think of mind mapping as a diagram representing the context of a concept. They're nonlinear. They use text and image, and they're organized around a central concept. Okay, and it lets us get everything out there, and then we can winnow down from that to the things we truly care about. Okay, so our mind map is going to be about us. You're going to notice that in the middle, I'm going to put me, and you're going to put me also, or you, or you could put your name. But I'm going to write it, and I'm going to make it kind of big and dark, and kind of make it special looking, because it is this central context that our mind map is based upon. So here's me. Now, frequently when we're making mind maps, we create little buckets that come off, and you can create sub-buckets and all these things. You can call them whatever you want. I call them buckets. Here's an example of one. All of us are going to be using 5 basic buckets. One of them is going to be race and gender. So let's come out here and put race and gender. Okay. You'll notice that I'm actually going to put an arrow back in because I feel like these things influence this more than anything. Over here, I'm going to put religion and spirituality. Excuse me. One of the things that we need to recognize is that not everybody is necessarily Catholic that goes to a Catholic school. Not everybody has the same worldview as us. And that's why I've put religion and spirituality. This opens it up to recognize our own personal lived value system and philosophy of life. So race and gender, religion and spirituality. Let's put values up here. Okay. Over here, I'm going to put passions. So I'm going to put a big bucket over here called passions. Passions, we'll talk about what those are and what they can look like here in a moment. I'm going to also put this thing down here. I didn't know what to label it, but I'm going to put cultural tastes. If you can't read my handwriting, don't worry. This will all get posted on campus, and there'll also be instructions for all of this. But it's mostly about the construction of the mind map. So now you'll see I've got my buckets organized around a central concept. Let's start filling them in. Let's start with some easy ones. Values. Things that I think are important are honesty to oneself, and honesty to others. Creativity. Not necessarily in the traditional sense of, oh, I can draw really well or I can paint really well. No, creativity is an audacious act of problem solving and creating new things. There's a Latin word, ganganere, which means to progenerate or to create, and it is the base word that the word genius is rooted from. And I think that's closely related to creativity. It's the idea of creating new or something from nothing. Along that lines, audacity. And I think of this as an act of conscious creativity making. For us to be able to break out of the confines of our everyday mind's landscape of thinking, like the cloud around us of perception, and to have the audacity to break beyond that and think of new things or perceive things in a new way is an audacious act. I think empathy is super important. Empathy for myself, empathy for others. It's the only way you and I will be able to make work about your lived experiences this year, is if I empathize with you and understand where you're coming from. Along that lines, generosity. I highly value that. I think competition outside of the context of sports or contests is silly. I think we should all be working together. If we're competitive, maybe one of us gets to the end point, but if we all work together, we can all get there as a group. I really try to create a studio space that is generous in its very nature and making. I'm not one who necessarily believes in breaking down or destroying things. I believe in creating. I believe in Making anew, I believe in making for yourself. Making is, it's a deeper philosophy, and you're going to actually see this word making show up in a lot of places just because I know myself so well around that. Let's hop over. So we've done values, religion and spirituality. I'm not going to talk about traditional religions necessarily, but I am going to I want us to, because we understand that as how that might influence and impact our lives. If you're Catholic and you grew up Catholic and you know went through all of your schooling around that, you know what that means. If you're another Lutheran or another spiritual religion, you know what that means for you. I'm going to talk about it a slightly different way. I'm going to put three things on here. The first one is capoeira. It's a Brazilian martial dance fight. I'm not going to go too much into that, but understand that it's a community that lives beyond the act that happens during the event. And it is a spiritual community that is a way of life. It's a lot like Kung Fu in that way, or Taoism. It's very much, it teaches and professes a spirituality that is about connectedness, empathy, generosity, taking negative energy and transforming is a creative, audacious act. So capoeira. Also in that line, I'm going to put yoga. I practice a lot of yoga, not only the mindfulness component, but also the body component. I think it's important to be connected in those two things. So many of us are disconnected from our bodies in our daily life. And then the last one's going to be art, and I'm going to put making. I have a philosophy around how we proceed in life, solving problems, empathetically, generosity, creativity. All of these are part of my art-making philosophy. And that's what's important about this, is that it determines, for me, a way of being that's very important to me and integral to how I make my way through the world. I'm going to label it a self-defined philosophy of living. I think that's important, making our own way. Race and gender. On the surface, I'm a Caucasian male. In this day and age, that has started to become a little bit of a negative connotation, but it's not for me. If you were to ask me who am I and how to identify, this is not what comes to my mind. This is not part of my mind's landscape, really. And so the question that comes to my mind is, do I actually care if I'm white and male? I mean, it does afford me some privileges that I recognize, and we can talk about that throughout the year. But it's just not part of what I think of when you ask me, if you were to ask me those things. But it does get me thinking about my own internal biases. I think that's important. And if you don't know what that means, and if I misspell something, please forgive. I'm both talking and doing video at the same time. I'm not going to dig into that too much right here and now, but that's what it's getting me thinking about. And it's a note there that if I want to make around that and unearth my own internal biases, I can. But it also gets me thinking about this idea of what are the societal expectations for, white males, and how do those form me? And I think those also feed into internal biases. But then again, I come back to this. Do I care? I'm personally more interested in making art about tacos and zombies than I am about my identity as a Caucasian male, okay? But it's there. For some of us, this may be an important part of who we are, particularly gender. These two things are so personal that you have to navigate it for yourself. But for me, it's not a big part of my mind map, because my spirituality, my values, my passions, my cultural tastes are what and who I am. Let's do another somewhat easier one. This one's called cultural tastes. This one should be a little bit easier for everybody else. I am huge into sci-fi and fantasy. Reading it, watching it, you name it. It's been a part of my landscape since I was a very young child. It also feeds into some other aspects of my personality, which are gaming. I'm not necessarily talking about computer games or Xbox or video games like that, but gaming as in role-playing games like old pen and paper D&D, which I played for many, many years, all kinds of different types of war games. Board games are huge. And in fact, in my family, even my small boys were huge board gamers. My boys learned to play chess around the age of 3 and 4 because that, even though chess is like a traditional board game, beyond the scope of what we normally play, it's an important game for them. It also creates family connection. It also creates all kinds of conversations and language that we have inside of our family that most people, wouldn't be aware of. Animation. Now, this one's kind of tricky, but let me just maybe put it out there by what I mean by that right now. Excuse the bell. Currently, my boys and I are watching Avatar, Last of the Airbenders. It's fantastic. Not only is it well written with good stories, it's animated, it's beautiful. From that, we've also branched out to Dragon Prince, and next on our list is Legend of Korra, which these are all related and created by the same people. But we're also huge fans of the whole Dragon Riders series. It's a big part of our mythology, and the way that we discuss and understand the world is through the animations that we watch. There are lines from shows like Three Below and Troll Hunters of Arcadia that come out at dinner time for us. This is really important. Comics, could talk all day. Could talk all day about comics, particularly Captain America and the Hulk, and Batman to some degree. But we're not going to go too much into that. You all have some schema for that. The way that I sort of move through the world, the way that I dress outside of the world is very much oriented around bicycling. I'm not going to go into it here too much, but I believe bicycling is one of the most important things in my life. I do it as an act of not protest or resistance or anything like that necessarily, but as an act of change. I consciously do not own a vehicle. Well, I do. My wife and I share one, but I try not to use it as much as possible because I prefer using my bike. I also want to get more biking infrastructure into, North America. I travel to different countries and explore their biking infrastructure and think about that. I travel by bike. Bikes are a big part of our lives, my wife, my boys, and everyone. And you'll probably see that again. But along with that cycling culture, which here in the urban environment of Chicago is also a street culture, there's an element of punk to what we are and what we do that also comes out in the way that I solve problems. Again, punk is actually also a self-defined spirituality component. It's a way of being, it's a way of life, it's a way of perceiving and understanding, but it's also music and culture and other things. It's culture. I believe I'm a maker. There's a maker culture out there, and I am so much a part of it. And these are a pretty good representation. Let's talk about passions. At the top is making. Passions are those things that we do without being told to do. I make all the time. I make every day. When I was a young boy, young adult, I don't know what you want to call it. But when I was in university, and I was in my first undergrad degree, I was actually studying environmental science, and I'd go home for family visits, and I'd have family members ask me, "Kid, what you gonna do with your life?" And I'd be like, "I don't know." And they're like, "Well, what kinds of things do you want to do?" And I'd be like, "Well, I just want to make things and solve problems." And they thought I was nuts at the time. This is 20 some odd years ago. But for me, I have at the root of every position in my life as a professional that I've taken has been making and solving problems. As an art teacher, that's all I do, making. And you'll see, again, making shows up in a lot of places. Cycling. I own more bikes than you can imagine, and they all do different things. Cycling. Outside. My family and I are outside constantly. We bike, we scoot. We are also camping and backpacking and traveling to other places. When we go to different cities, different countries, we're outside. We're experiencing what they are. We're either backpacking, or we are biking, or we are kayaking, or. We spend a lot of time outside, and it's part of our family religion, our family understanding. We must all go outside during the day. Otherwise, we go crazy. Even in the dead of winter, we're outside. family. For me, I'm not too sure I really became an adult until I got married, until I started to have children, until I started to have to understand that there are things bigger than myself, that there are people that now depend on me that I have to shape and mold into good people. It's what's helped foster my understanding of empathy, generosity, honesty, all of those. It's so important. So you'll see that inside of this, I've got this beautiful map. From this, we can make so much. Because if I ask you as a art student to sit down and make something, if you haven't done some work to think a little bit and to kind of come up with an idea about what concept you actually want to start tackling and how you want to represent things, there's no point. So this is one of the tools that we're going to be using this year. We're going to make a mind map, and your first one's going to look a lot like mine. Hope you enjoy it.